This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report, as we go directly to the Middle East, to Gaza. Juan?
Well, Israeli forces are continuing to pound Gaza City, hitting civilian targets, including a UN building, a hospital, and a building housing several media organizations, in some of the heaviest shelling in nearly 3 weeks. Israeli troops, backed by helicopter gunships, tanks, and heavy guns, have pushed deeply into densely populated neighborhoods. Thousands of Gaza City residents are fleeing their homes. The Palestinian death toll now stands at least 1,045, at least half of them civilians. Another 4,860 have been injured. 13 Israelis have been killed, including 4 by friendly fire.
We go now to Gaza to speak with Dr. Musa El-Haddad, a retired physician. He lives in Gaza City. Welcome to Democracy Now! Tell us where you are and what's happening right now, Dr. El-Haddad.
Well, I am in Gaza City itself. What's happening is a state that is almost impossible to describe. Israeli army has escalated the attack on civilians since last night. I did not have a single minute of sleep for the last probably 18 hours. They've been bombardment every day, every minute, all night long. My house was rocking all the time. And this morning, when the sun rose, we could at least look from the window, and I could see, as you probably have seen on the TV, smoke coming of buildings, civilian buildings, apartment buildings. Actually, 2 hospitals were bombarded this morning, Al-Quds and Al-Wafa Hospital. Al-Wafa Hospital is a hospital for handicaps, by the way, and old people. Media apartment was also hit this morning, not far from my house. That's Abu Dhabi news agency. So wherever, it's extremely unsafe now, even inside our homes. Smoke everywhere. I could see cluster bombs being fired this morning, and the phosphorus bombs now are used freely on these civilians. I'm sure you have seen it on the TV.
Dr. El-Haddad, we heard that white phosphorus was dropped on the UN compound, that hundreds of people, families were there taking refuge. We discussed white phosphorus yesterday with Human Rights Watch. Can you talk, as a doctor, about the effects of the burning? For example, they say it can't be put out, the fires that it creates, just by pouring water on it. In fact, that exacerbates
you cannot actually. If you pour water on it, it gets worse. If you get this burn, number one, those people who get exposed to white phosphorus get severe respiratory distress. They can hardly breathe. And then the exposed skin gets burned. If you put water on it, the burning increase becomes worse. So you cannot really do much about it. And if the affected area was exposed too much for white phosphorus, it burns the skin, muscles, and deep to the bones. So eventually, a lot of these patients will lose some of their limbs.
Dr. El-Haddad, we've just been joined by Christopher Gunnis. He's the spokesperson for the UN Relief and Works Agency. Can you tell us, Chris Gunnis, what has happened to the UN compound in Gaza?
Well, this morning there were 3 rounds of white phosphorus which landed in our compound in Gaza. That set ablaze the main warehouse and the big workshop we have there for vehicles. At the time, there were 700 or so people displaced from the fighting. There were full fuel tankers there. The Israeli army have been given all the coordinates of all the facilities, including this one. They also knew that there were fuel tankers laden with fuel compound, and they would have known that there were hundreds of people who'd taken refuge. The Israeli defense minister apologized to the Secretary General for this, but for us, we need deeds and not words. We have to get on with our humanitarian task. Amazingly, our operations are continuing today, and I have to pay tribute to the extraordinary bravery and commitment of our staff in Gaza. We're continuing with our food distributions. We're picking up humanitarian goods from the crossings, and we are doing healthcare as best we can.
And from this latest strike, were there any casualties in your compound?
There were at least 3 That's when I was last able to talk to office, but it's possible there are more. But for the moment, 3 people injured. And it again tragically illustrates that when you have this on and off the military machine, when you have rockets flying out of Gaza, humanitarian workers and innocent civilians are going to get caught in the crossfire. Of course, we condemn the rockets that come out of Gaza, but the world has been revulsed by the pictures that have come out of Gaza, which is why today we, on the ground, utterly endorse and back the call of the world's top diplomat, Ban Ki-moon. He's the conscience of the world. He's come here with a Security Council resolution which says stop the fighting, and his party is on the ground who are continuing to fight, are doing so in defiance and in isolation.
And this use of phosphorus munitions, your response to that?
Well, I'm not a military person, but as a colleague of mine said to me in Gaza today, who has a military background and knows these things, it looks like white phosphorus, it smells like white phosphorus, and it burns like white phosphorus. We weren't able initially to put the fighting out because we had only conventional fire extinguishers. White phosphorus needs sand, and we didn't have sand in quantities. But I'm pleased to say that the Red Cross fire services have managed to make it a compound, and they're now fighting the blaze.
Chris Gunness, in addition to the 3 people you say that were wounded there, what about the thousands of tons of supplies? Is that right? Food, medical supplies, other aid in this building?
Yes, I don't have a handle on exact quantities, but there's no doubt that aid was destroyed, aid paid for with your tax dollars and mine. It's a tragic piece of symbolism that the very pallets that we deliver humanitarian assistance on are on fire in Gaza. What more tragic symbolism could there be of the situation that we find ourselves in today?
Ehud Barak said this was a mistake, the attack on the UN compound. Your response?
Well, we want deeds and not words. Our workers and indeed the civilians in Gaza have come in harm's way too many times. This on-off with the pause, so-called, is not good enough. It's woefully inadequate because, of course, we have to pre-position our aid before the actual pause takes place. So there's heavy fighting where I am, the booms. Anyway, which is slightly distracting. There are. We have to position our aid at our food distribution centres. We have to get our medical supply to hospitals, which we are doing our best to supply. We have got to get fuel to hospitals because most of the hospitals in Gaza today are running 24/7 on emergency generators. So babies on life support systems, patients, the dying, the elderly, the sick, who need electricity are life-threatening situations. So we are continuing with our work, but we say, please, will the parties on the ground listen to the call of the world's top diplomat today? On his first day of his peace mission to Israel, he's again endorsed the call of the Security Council for an immediate ceasefire. And this terrible attack on the United Nations headquarters is another tragic illustration of what happens when you don't have a ceasefire. There has to be a permanent ceasefire. And
I'd like to ask Dr. Musa El-Haddad, who is still on the line with us. The Israelis say that they keep notifying the population to flee areas that they are attacking. What does this mean to you? Where could you possibly go to flee to safety?
Well, number one, let me tell you that I've heard from many people whose houses have been demolished, bombarded, that no warning has been given. Some people were given warning through the Red Cross, but many people were not warned. So those who leave their houses, they just go either to shelters, UNRWA shelters, or it's not actually shelters, schools, or to their relatives. But let me just add a comment to what Mr. Ehud Olmert said, that he apologized, that was a mistake. If that was one mistake, and I tell you right now on air that they have committed hundreds of mistakes during the last 3 weeks. What about all these apartment buildings that only civilians occupy? Children and families are trapped in elevators and under the stairs. Children and women bleeding in the streets, and the Israeli army tanks are not allowing Red Cross or humanitarian aid to go and help them. The ambulances are not allowed to go in. They bleed for 4 hours, and we can hear